Good morning, everyone. My name is Arturo Sandoval. I'm the director of the Center of Southwest Culture, which I founded 30 years ago. And our mission is to create healthy indigenous and Mexicano Chicano communities. Very briefly, I was born and raised in the Española Valley in northern New Mexico. I'm one of 11 children. We were a single income family. My dad worked and my mom worked even harder trying to raise us. But we always grew our own food, and I saw firsthand a regional food network that was very, very vital to our survival in those days, because people in Mora, which is a valley up in northern New Mexico at about 8,000 feet, would grow a lot of root crops, but they couldn't grow chili and corn very well. So they used to load their trucks with all the root crops they had and then drive down to our valley. We had a lot of orchards. We had a lot of chili. We had a lot of other crops and vegetables that they didn't have, and we would just, no money would exchange hands. We would just exchange the food we grew so that we'd have a complete diet. So I saw the positive impacts of that, of growing your own food. I was also concerned a number of years ago that the path forward for our peoples to find socio and economic equality is the first step on that is to make sure we have a good access to food. And I think the pandemic showed us that it's a very fragile system. Even though it's global, it's a very fragile food system. And if we can learn how to grow our own vegetables, even part of it, that would be a big step towards ours being able to sustain ourselves no matter what happens globally. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, we have trained a lot of farmers to grow their own food. And what we noticed was that it's very pricey to buy locally grown or organic food at farmers markets, and it's beyond the reach of a lot of our communities. So Sembrando Salud is our response to those issues, that if we can get our own families to start growing in their backyards and feeding themselves, that's a fantastic way to improve our health, especially of our children. And then our farmers grow, and we try to sell to our local schools so that we're feeding our children at their local schools as much as possible. All of this is part of our journey at the center to create healthy communities, healthy psychologically, healthy physically, healthy emotionally. We want to bring back the communal models that we all grew up in our pueblos and in our tribes and in our raza land-based communities. So Sembrando Salud is part of a larger vision, and what you're doing by growing your own food is taking a step towards ultimately your own independence. So welcome, and we're really, really looking forward to working with you closely, being partners with you, and encouraging you as much as possible to eat healthy. And as soon as you get your first vegetables, I'd just call me, because I'd like to do a little tour and do a taste tour. I don't have to invite anybody, and just see how you guys are doing. But welcome, and thank you so much for joining us in this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arturo. Before we get started, a quick note: we've set up a Facebook group for everybody to join and share your tips, your questions, pictures of your growth, and really connect with each other. So the name of the Facebook group is Sembrando Salud 2021. I'll be trying to invite folks that I am able to contact on Facebook, but it's searchable to anyone. If you want to join that, we would really love to see you there. We'll be sharing more of our resources, a little segment of Ask Emma and Ask Jose. So if you have questions about your soil or what have you, they'll be able to respond and help you out. So if you follow us on Facebook at Center of Southwest Culture, and also on Instagram at Center of Southwest Culture, and we're gonna test out the hashtag Grow Your Own as a good way to keep us all connected to what's happening with Sembrando Salud. And I'm gonna hand it over to Emma just to talk a little bit more about previous Sembrando Salud years and kind of what we can expect.
Hi, everyone. So in previous years for Sembrando Salud, we, of course, were doing in-person workshops. We were able to reach I think it was 130 families around New Mexico, in communities across the South Valley in Albuquerque, the International District, Jemez Pueblo, as well as the town of Bernalillo. Oh, and in Pine Hill too. So it was a really cool program. We were able to get a lot of people involved in growing their own food. We distributed the same supplies that we're distributing to you all as participants of this program. And really the goal for doing these workshops, as Arturo mentioned, is really to get people growing their own food, to close that gap between not having access to healthy produce. And it's so easy to be able to grow your own organic food with very minimal costs. We know how expensive not only organic produce, but starting up your own garden can be. So we want to be of service in helping people to be able to get that established in any way that we possibly can. So Sembrando Salud, the workshops that you go through are going to be geared toward learning how to set up your own garden, learning about the different aspects of soil, because that's really the key of getting your garden started. We're going to learn about the different kinds of spaces that you can grow a garden in. And we'll also be helping you through how to actually plant the different seeds that we're going to be giving you, how to use them. We'll also be offering some cooking demonstrations later on and providing you with different recipes that'll help you to use the stuff that you're growing in your garden. And of course, along the way, our entire staff is here to support you. So any questions that you have, anything that you feel like you need support in, if you see a bug that you're not sure what it is, we are here for you along every step of the way. So yeah, I think that is basically what we're about, and we can kind of jump into it from here. So with the program, in your participation, these are the supplies that we're going to be providing you with at the end of the series of workshops. We provide drip irrigation supplies for you. In New Mexico, we have a huge problem with water evaporation. Many times, watering plants kind of results in most of the water not even reaching the roots of the plant because the sun kind of takes it all. So drip irrigation is a really awesome way to make sure that the plants are actually getting the water that they need. So we're providing every participant with 20 feet of the poly irrigation tubing. You'll also receive 20 drip emitters, which you can adjust to emit 1 to 5 gallons per hour. And we'll go into water usage a little bit later on here. You'll also receive a punch tool so that you can put the emitters into the hose. You'll receive the end cap as well as the hose attachment cap, so you can just plug it directly into your outside hose. And you'll receive the 10 landscaping staples to keep it secure on the ground so it doesn't move around. You'll also be receiving a bag of soil to help you get started. It's about 3 cubic feet of starter soil, which can be mixed into your existing soil. Or you can also use it to just fill a container if that's what you have. And we'll also be providing you with an assortment of organic seeds. So you can look at the list here. These are all seeds that were chosen as vegetables that every household should be kind of familiar with. tomatoes, jalapenos, green chili, summer squash, carrots. We'll also be introducing some herbs to you, some basil, mint, cilantro, and marigolds, which are edible, but more importantly, will also help you with controlling some of the pests that really enjoy the other vegetables that you'll be growing in your garden. And lastly, we have compiled a guidebook for you. So every participant will also receive this little booklet that will just kind of go into more detail about the things that we're talking about here today and in our future workshops as well. So to get started, the first thing that you need to consider is how much space you need for your garden. And a lot of people think that you need a lot of ground space or a big backyard to be able to grow a garden, and that is not true. You can actually grow a garden just using pots and containers. So even if you're limited to a very small space, like the balcony of an apartment or just a really tiny backyard, you can still grow these vegetables and produce enough to feed yourself and your family. So in the future, we will be hosting some workshops to kind of show you how to configure the space for your garden, how to figure out what plants will do well in a container, how many plants you can grow per container, and how to do square foot spacing if you have a little bit larger space to work with. So at this point, we can kind of open it up to any questions that you guys might have about those kinds of topics to kind of get us started. And more than likely, we'll be answering some of the questions that you have anyway. But yeah, just we'd like to open up the floor to anybody who has any immediate questions.
Hi, my name is Leah. I'm from Tallahatchie, New Mexico. Last year, I was growing squash and pumpkins and corn, and was just also watermelon. Was just wondering what can I group? I guess which groups I can grow better together as far as vegetables.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we will be talking about doing companion planting in one of our future workshops, I believe in our second one. But just to kind of give you an idea, there's a lot of different vegetables that can't be grown together because of different reasons. But for example, like the corn that you're growing and the melons and the squash, those are all really great plants to grow together. And I'm sure you've probably heard of like the Three Sisters method of gardening, which is using squash, corn, and beans together. And the reason for that is that they all kind of interact together in a way that support one another. And so planting the corn provides a trellis basically for beans, or if you're using melons, to climb up. The squash below kind of helps to shade out any weeds that might sort of suppress the growth of your other plants. And in that way, like I said, they all kind of support each other. So I think that method that you're using is a great one. And in our next workshop, we can kind of talk about some other plants that you might be able to incorporate into that plan that will just kind of benefit you even more. So I hope that kind of answers your question for now.
Yes, it does.
Okay,
and
awesome.
can I also have a follow-up question?
Sure, of course.
So the squash, as far as pruning, trying to get an idea of how far do I cut the leaves for it to continue to I guess, flower the vegetable.
So in my experience, I have not ever pruned the leaves for a squash plant. Typically, as long as you are harvesting the fruit, and even sometimes for squash in particular, if you harvest what they call the male flowers, which are usually the ones that have the longer stems, that will allow you to continue to produce more female flowers that turn into the squash fruits. And as long as you do that, you shouldn't have to actually prune the leaves. If you're going to, typically the best method is to only prune the leaves that are just not quite looking as healthy as others. And usually those are the ones that are the oldest leaves. So those are the ones that'll grow closer to like the base of the plant. So if you want to do it that way, that's kind of where I would start if I were you.
Then we have a question from Angelo, and Chelsea wrote, my soil is super clay and sandy. What can I help with the soil getting super hard and now allowing for the roots to expand out?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I think that probably everybody in New Mexico has to deal with that exact issue. So one of the best things that you can do is to incorporate more organic material into your soil. And by organic material, we're talking about like old leaves, tree bark. You can use like grass clippings, all kinds of things. And we'll kind of talk about that as we get into our discussion about composting as well. Because compost is actually one of the best carriers for all of that organic material. And it can help to create sort of those little air pockets in the clay and the sand that you're working with, so that there's better water infiltration for your plants, and also so that those roots of your plants can expand out. The other thing that we will probably get into here is cover cropping, which is planting a variety of different kinds of plants like clovers, radishes, sunflowers are another option, that actually help you to kind of fix those problems that you have with your soil. And they kind of do that all on their own without you really having to provide them with a lot of help. So yeah, those are two options. And like I said, we'll definitely be getting into that a little bit further here.
And then Angelo, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. So I live in the Wells Park area, and I've discovered that I have a family of about like 8 trash pandas and a bunch of skunks. So
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out what's the best option for mitigating those issues.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially with the trash pandas, because they're very smart. They know how to get into things, even if you're using fencing. So honestly, I think that the best thing is to do humane trapping in that case. There are some different local companies who do that, as well as the city animal control. And in a lot of those cases, what they'll do is they'll provide you with a humane trap. If you have a family of them, It might take a while to trap all of them, but once they have them, they would relocate them to a safer area where they can, live freely and not damage people's property and things like that. So that would be my main suggestion. Other than that, I mean, if you have a compost pile at home, making sure that there's nothing super attractive to them in there. Usually they're attracted to like meat and dairy products. So keeping those out of your compost would be helpful. And then just doing anything that you can, like putting up netting or chicken wire, anything to just kind of make it that much more difficult for them to access your food would be helpful.
Go ahead, Arturo.
Oh, and to follow up on that, I live in the Old Town area, and occasionally I'll get skunks that somehow figure out how to get under my house. And although I admire their odor, it doesn't work that well for my wife. So I have called 311, the city number 311, and they send out an expert subcontractor they have, and he does exactly what Emma says. He sets up traps that don't hurt them at all. And when they come out, they get trapped, and then he takes them and relocates them, maybe up in Tanawan, I don't know. But anyway, they take them someplace else, and life goes back to normal. So that is calling the city 311 number to report that is a real simple way to get them to come out and help you with that.
And Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah, no, yeah. So I got a question. I was wondering if like stray cats are a problem at all, because I know down our road we got too many stray cats. So are they a problem at all when it comes to gardening and like just growing stuff?
Not necessarily. The main problem with stray cats is that they think that any of your gardening spaces are a toilet for them. So you don't really want to have that in your garden soil, because you're going to be hopefully eating from that soil. So I would suggest the same thing. If you can, there are feral cat groups that will come out and trap any of these stray cats that are in your neighborhood. The problem with that is that sometimes they don't actually relocate them. They just kind of make sure that they're taken care of and have shots and things like that, but don't necessarily remove them from the area. But you could use some of the same fencing techniques, just kind of covering your garden with a layer of the chicken wire so that they can't dig in there. Typically will be enough of a deterrent to kind of keep them out of there. But otherwise, yeah, stray cats aren't quite as much of an issue, because they're not quite as interested in eating what you're growing. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Emma. And I'm writing all of these questions down so I can send out some follow-up information or post it on that Facebook page for you to know how to contact city or municipal animal controls, or some of those organizations that can help with mitigating pests and stuff. Angela, you had another question?
Yeah, my next question is about the, I just got my water bill, and it came with a little pamphlet about like watering 2 days per week in April and May. With that, like, is there like a restriction on how much water we can use, or is it more based on just watering between the hours of 11 and 7 for 2 days, or like depending on the size of your garden? What does that have to do? Does that, you know, is there anything that we have to keep in mind?
Yeah, so I don't think that they've put any kind of limit on how much water you can use, although of course the less water you're using, the better. The main thing and the reason that they've kind of put these regulations in place is because of the amount of evaporation that happens. So the time limits that they've put in place are really because if you are watering between the hours of in the summertime, basically between like 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., it's still too hot outside. And so most of the water that you're putting on your soil doesn't even get below like the first inch. So that's one of the reasons that we're kind of setting you up for using the drip irrigation system. And what that allows you to do is actually, you can leave it on overnight, which is a scary concept. But the amount of water that it puts out is so slow that you could actually just turn it on, you know, just like not even a quarter turn on your spigot before you go to bed, and leave it on so that there's a slow, steady drip of water to your plants. And what that'll do is make sure that the water that is coming out of there is actually infiltrating the soil all the way through. So that's one method. If you do want to water at a different time, like if you're someone who gets up super early in the morning, or if you want to just water before you go to bed at night, you could turn up the water a little bit higher and water for a less amount of time. But really, my suggestion would be that the slow and steady method is the best way. And that way, it really is more effective if you're only watering the 2 times a week. So yeah, we'll talk more about the water usage actually in this workshop. So yeah, we can actually do some calculations to figure out how much water and how long you should be watering for the amount of space that you have.
Yeah, we definitely will cover water and more soil questions, and then also companion planting, seeds and such in our next few workshops. Just kind of keeping an eye on our time though. I think we'll move ahead. We do have another section of Q&A a little bit later in today's agenda, but I want to make sure that we get through all of our topics first. So I do see your hand, Valentina, but I'm going to continue so that we can get through our soil and water topics. So these are just kind of the general things that we're going to do regarding soil today.
Yeah, so when we're talking about soil, one of the things that we focus on at the Center of Southwest Culture, particularly with our farmers, but something that we'd like to introduce to you as well, is using healthy soil principles. And basically, you can see these up on your screen here, but the goal is to use regenerative practices that mimic the way that nature works more than using practices that sort of contradict what nature would do. So I'm just going to kind of go through these really quickly here. But number one is to know your context. It matters how much space you have, what your existing soil is like, what the climate is, because New Mexico, as you probably know, is unlike the climate in so many other places. So we're really unique here. What is your water source? Do you have one? And what are your goals ultimately? The second rule is to not disturb. The less you disturb the soil, the better. And by disturbance, we're talking about tilling. There's a lot of people who think that just, turning the soil every couple of weeks is the best thing to do to make your soil workable. It's not. That's actually untrue, and especially for New Mexico, because our soils are so delicate here. And disturbance can also mean chemical disturbance, things like pesticides or applying synthetic fertilizers, which actually end up making your soil dependent on those things, so that if you do stop using those things, your soil can't function the way that it's supposed to. Number 3 is to cover and build surface armor. So like it says here, soil is like the skin of the earth, and it needs protection from the elements just like yours does. So you can think of plants as sort of being like a sunscreen for soil. And that's why when you see bare patches of land, typically you'll see all kinds of different weeds pop up. Tumbleweeds are a main one that you see that try to cover the bare soil around New Mexico. And the reason that happens is because the earth is trying to protect itself in a way that is the easiest for it to accomplish that goal. So think about how you can actually nurture that process rather than allowing weeds to kind of take over. Number 4 is to mix it up. A law of nature is to create diversity. Biodiversity in your garden with different plants will attract different insects and wildlife that help to naturally balance it so that you don't have an overabundance of pests or weeds. Nature is self-healing, it's self-regenerating. So as long as we kind of work with it to create that balance, it'll basically do most of the work for you. And lastly, and probably the most important, is to feed the soil. Soil is alive. It contains an insane number of microorganisms. And so when we talk about feeding the soil, or even feeding plants, what you're actually feeding are the microorganisms in the soil that do all of the work to make sure that your plants are healthy and resilient against pests and disease. And so this graphic that you see on the slide here, this is what a healthy soil food web actually looks like. And you can see all of the different kind of players that take part in this web. And so when we talk about soil health, it's not just the plants that we're talking about being healthy. It's all of these different animals and organisms in the soil that are all working together to kind of accomplish that goal. A cool fact is that a single teaspoon of healthy soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on the entire planet. And also, the microorganisms that are in the soil are actually what create that smell of rain when water hits the earth. There's a word for it. I think it's petrichor. And even, you know, if you water outside, like you can always smell when somebody is using their sprinklers. And that's what that smell is. It's actually the microorganisms in the soil. So if we think about establishing the foundation of our gardens in this way, this is what is going to set you up for success. It's the idea that we're not just feeding the plants when we're creating a garden space. We're feeding the microbiology and all of the different organisms that help to create this food web. So these are the components of healthy soil. And when we get into our composting segment, we'll talk a little bit more about what these materials are and what they accomplish. But basically, healthy soil is composed of nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, and water. And that's it. And I will also tell you guys, this is also what the human body is basically composed of. So in that way, you know, it's awesome to have that connection between the soil sort of operating the same way that our human bodies do. So when we're talking about carbon and nitrogen, we think of nitrogen as being the green materials that are in soil or in your compost pile. And the carbon is the brown materials. So you can see on this little graphic here, there are so many different things that you can use to create these materials. For brown materials, it can be dry leaves that you're raking up from your yard. It can be old straw or hay. If you have a fireplace, you can use the ashes from your fireplace, although please make sure that they are completely cool before you use them. You can use old newspapers or even brown paper bags. You can use dryer lint, eggshells, the pet hair that you brush out of your pets, even shredded paper. So yeah, really, there's no reason that any of that kind of stuff should go to waste because you can use it for your soil. And I won't go over the green materials. You can see the list here, but yeah, like animal manures are definitely a green material. I see your question there. You can incorporate that in. You can use vegetable scraps, any coffee grounds, even like weeds that you pull from your yard, as long as they don't have seeds. So yeah, there's so much that you can use to incorporate into your soil. So we're going to talk a little bit about building your own compost because it is one of the main things that you can do that doesn't cost anything, and it's super easy to do. You really don't need a lot of space to be able to do it either. In this little video that you see, we are building a new compost pile from scratch. And basically, building a compost pile is a process of just layering your brown and green materials. You basically just want them to be an even mixture. So using as much green stuff as you are brown stuff and layering it so that it's equally proportioned. If you're doing a compost pile on the ground, opposed to like a compost tumbler or something like that, if you lay some twigs or small sticks down first, that's going to create some airflow through the bottom of your compost pile. And the air is super important because that is what is going to activate the microbiology that lives in your compost that break down all of these materials into something that's usable for the soil. So super important if you're using a compost tumbler, you don't have to use your sticks because the tumbler will automatically create that aeration for you. But if you are starting a compost pile on the ground, that's going to be a super important step for you. And also, I will just mention, you'll see in this video here too that we wet down the compost pile at the end. We make sure that the top layer is covered with brown materials because that's going to prevent it from getting smelly, basically. And then the water that we put down should be just enough to kind of dampen it. Your compost, when it's wet, should have the feel of like a sponge after you've squeezed out all of the water. And Any less than that, and your compost isn't really going to do its thing. It won't complete that process. If you have too much, that's going to invite more of the bad bacteria into your compost that will attract more bugs, possibly like some other kinds of pests that you don't really want to have around your compost. So it's really important to make sure that that moisture level is at the right level. So with your compost pile, one of the main reasons that people say they don't want to compost at home is because of the smell. And that doesn't have to be the case. Usually, any smelly compost is because of either an imbalance of the materials that are in your compost or an imbalance of the moisture. So this little table here kind of gives you some troubleshooting solutions to kind of mitigate that problem. Smelly compost can be the result of not having enough airflow and too much moisture. So turning your compost and adding more brown materials and also possibly reducing the amount of moisture that's in there will help to address that problem. Also, the thing that could definitely cause some smelly compost is putting the things in there that you shouldn't compost, like animal products such as grease, bones, any kind of dairy products like milk or yogurt or anything like that. You know, those things smell bad on their own if you leave them out. So adding those to your compost is just gonna make that even worse and attract a whole lot of things that you don't want. So this is helpful. We'll include this in the workbook that you'll have too, so you'll have that as a reference later.
Thank you, Emma. And we're going to take a little bit break so people can stretch and take care of yourselves. Valentina, I see your hand still up. Did you have a quick question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, so I'm in the South Valley and I have access to water rights, but I'm not really sure how to use that to irrigate. So is there other trainings that I can take that are provided to kind of learn how to use that system?
Yeah, so typically the information that we have on like the irrigation systems is something that we would include in our sister program, Codice. But we are more than happy to provide you with additional resources on that. And I know that actually the Acequia Association has a lot of really awesome videos that we can also track down for you that I believe they've published recently for people to check out. So I think with Caterie's assistance, that might be something that we can kind of put together for people to reference as well.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so please take care of yourself, take a stretch, get some snacks, and we will pull back together at 11:32. Okay, we can start gathering back to get into water usage and setting up our drip irrigation system. So I think if we are ready and if everyone is ready for this second half, we'll just get right into it with drip irrigation.
So we talked a little bit earlier about some of the benefits of using drip irrigation. And just to kind of reiterate that, the main reason for using drip irrigation is that it prevents a lot of the water loss that happens because of evaporation. It delivers water more slowly and steadily directly to the roots of your plants rather than just kind of sitting on the top of your soil, which happens a lot when you're using sprinklers or if you're even using flood irrigation kind of methods. With the drip irrigation systems that we're using, they're really awesome. For one, because these lines are reusable for up to 15 years. The emitters, sometimes you will need to replace because the sun kind of bakes them over time and they get a little brittle, but they're extremely inexpensive to purchase. I think you can get something like 200 little emitters for like $7. So it's a super affordable system, and it's also expandable. So what we're providing you through the program can help you to get started. But if you want to expand it even further, there are so many ways that you can just continue to add on to it over time. And these particular emitters, they can deliver up to 5 gallons of water per hour. We'll kind of do some calculations to figure out, like I said, how much time you should allow your drip irrigation system to run based on the amount of space that you have and the number of emitters that you're using. So we'll go over that in a little bit here. And for this section, I'm going to have our program manager, Jose Castro Lopez, go ahead and explain the setup of your drip irrigation. So Jose, take it away.
All right. Guess it's time to earn my paycheck around here. Good afternoon, everyone. So the polytubing isn't necessarily anything difficult. It's going to be really simple, and it's going to be really easy. So that's why I explain it, and Emma does the difficult stuff. So on the polytubing, when you actually have it in your hands, you'll see there's 2 lines running through, and you want to punch your hole right in that one because you want to keep your emitters in line, and you want to know where was the last spot where you put a hole. Then the emitters just push into the line, and you'll know they both worked. You know, you punch in the hole and you have the emitter in because they'll make a little popping sound. And then we have 2 end lines. One is for the end cap, so the water won't just keep coming out at the end, and it also creates pressure. So the water, the emitters have pressure to emit water. Then in the video, as you see, you could run it to a hose, which would probably be the best way to do it. Or I saw in the comments that somebody had a timer, and that might even work even best for if you have access to a timer, because then you don't have to wake up at 5 in the morning to turn on your water. It just does it by itself. So typically these lines are not all that strong. So you want to, when you open your spigot, you want to do it slowly, and the water will come out slowly. And yeah, the cool things about the emitters is these specific emitters is that they're adjustable. So you could either do 1 gallon an hour up to 10 gallons per hour. So therefore you don't waste too much. So let's see, if using above ground catchment. Okay, so we know we could also use rain barrels if people don't have access to water off their houses. It just has to be elevated, and I believe Emma said it has to be in a position itself where it's at least 3 feet off the floor, so giving it so gravity can do its job and just push the water down. And yeah, it works very well that way. Let's see. And as you see there, they offer rebates for timers in Albuquerque. Nice. I didn't know that. That's cool. Okay. It's Angelo saying they offer rebates for timers. So yeah, let's go to the next page. Cool. Calculating your water needs. So in New Mexico garden needs at least 2 inches of water per week, and it takes 1.246 gallons of water to soak 1 square foot of 4 inches. Based on this math, a 100 square foot garden would need 125 gallons per of water per week, either rain or watering. Cool. Next one. I think there's the other one has a mathematical format. So let's do this one together. I don't know if you guys have a phone or maybe a calculator on your computer. So I'll give you a couple seconds so you can pull that out, and we're gonna do this together right now. So how many square feet are you gonna gardening for to keep it simple? We're gonna do a garden that's 10 feet length, 10 feet wide. So that's gonna give us 100 square feet, right? All right, so it's 100 square feet, and that's A, and then we go to A times 1.246, which is the gallons of water needed per week. So 100 times 1.246. And then we're going to divide that minutes per week it will take for water to space it out in emitters on the highest setting or the lowest setting. So I think we should do the lowest setting, so we could give it a good amount of watering time. So we're going to divide it, instead of 1.67, which is the highest setting, we're going to do the lowest setting, which is 0.33. 0.33. Okay, and then we're gonna divide those minutes per week by 60. That's how many hours. And then we're gonna water 2 times a week. So divide that by 2. So that's gonna give us 3 hours and 14 minutes, right? 3:14. Yes, it's gonna give us 3 hours and 14 minutes. If you're on a timer, that would be really helpful. If not, as Emma suggested, if you leave it even lower and stretch out your time more, so you can leave it all overnight, just it will emit little by little, and you won't see the results right away when you turn it on because it's so low. But next morning when you come out, the whole field's going to be soaked, but in a good way, without you paying a large bill for water. Because as I said, the emitters at the low setting will only emit 1 gallon per hour. So, I mean, I think you, every time you flush, you waste like 5 gallons or 3 gallons or something crazy like that. So yeah, stop flushing. Just kidding. Next slide, please. Okay, so we recommend spreading the watering out to at least 2 times a week. Well, now this is not really a recommendation. It's the city's telling us that's the only time we have. So 2 times a week, and as you know, if you've ever been outside, it's crazy hot out there. So give the plants enough time and enough water to stay alive. And also something important to know is that even though you feel that it's getting really hot and you want to water it again, even though you already watered twice a week, so plants are really resistant. The seeds that we're going to give you are really heat resistant, and they might even grow better when you only do 2 times instead of watering more, because you might kill them. And these specific seeds that we got from this contractor are drought resistant, and they do pretty well out here, so you should be okay. If you notice that your soil is drying out between watering, consider increasing the number of times per week. We shouldn't, unless it's really dry, then maybe, but you should be okay. And this was a suggestion, but now it's a city mandate. The best times of day to water are early in the morning or late in the evening. And that's because of what Emma was saying, evaporation. Let's try to conserve as much water so we could eat really good, healthy vegetables. Next slide, please. Questions. Go ahead and ask questions, but not any hard ones. Or hard ones, it's okay.
When you're when you're done with your gardening for the year, and winter comes in, is it advisable to just take the entire thing out and kind of store it somewhere and then redo the whole thing in the following year, or can you just leave them in the ground? Because I know they're not. It's pretty superficial how deep you dig them into the ground. And so I'm assuming that with New Mexico winters, they can freeze and not be usable anymore, right?
Yeah. Well, it could go either way. I know these are made to last. So if you leave them outside, obviously you got to disconnect it from your faucet and everything so you won't damage your home. But unless you like move them or step on them, they should be okay. But best practices would be take out all the water, any extra that it might have in the line, and put it away. But they're made to last. Good question though. Thank you. And then is there a question in the chat?
We have Angelo has a question, and then we'll go to the chat question from Wells.
Okay.
My question has to do with like a hose from the water from the tap or water from the hose.
Yeah.
Would it be better to maybe get barrels or anything like that to let all the what do they put in the water to clean it, the chlorine and the to kind of let it like gas out that stuff and then water, or let it warm up? Does that have anything to do with the better water, or
Great question. Help me on this one, Edma. But
Yeah.
farmers who water at night, and the water comes from from the ground, and that water is cold as river water, and their plants do great. But I'm not too sure on municipal water.
So
well, I'm mainly asking like just for like the pH levels really, and what they actually treat the water with, and then what's coming out of the hose immediately versus it sitting out in the sun for a little bit before you put it out.
yeah, that's a really, really great question. Because for people who don't know, the tap water, they do put chlorine in our city municipal water sources. And the reason for that is to basically make sure that there's not any harmful bacteria in there. But what that effectively does is it also kills all of the good bacteria that might be in there. And, as we're learning about soil health and composting, we know that the microorganisms, which is the good bacteria, are really important for keeping our gardens healthy. So there's two things here. I think that it is an awesome idea to kind of let your water sit out, to let that chlorine evaporate. Typically, if you let it sit out for 24 hours, all of the chlorine that's in there will evaporate. So if you're able to do that, that's awesome. If you're not able to do that though, typically just kind of letting the drip system emit the water. It's not going to put enough chlorine in there across that wide of a surface to affect the microbiology that much. So you should still be safe with using tap water. I really haven't seen too many issues with doing that. But again, if you are able to let that chlorine gas off before you use it, why not? I think that's an awesome idea.
And then the question from the chat from Wells is, our garden is located in an old sheep corral. Would it be recommended to turn on drip irrigation in the evenings and let it go all night?
Yeah, I think that is an awesome idea. And like Jose said, depending on the amount of space that you have, you just want to make sure that you're calculating how much water you need, so that when you turn your spigot on, that you're either turning it down super low so that you can stretch that out until you get up in the morning, or set it up on a timer so that you don't really have to worry about that. Because the main thing is really that you just want to make sure that you're watering enough and not too much. Because I would imagine that, if an old sheep corral gets flooded, that might not be a great thing. So yeah, just keep your calculations in mind so that you know exactly how long you should run your water.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from anybody? And I'll just note that the kind of little video clips that you saw are actually just clips of full-length videos that we have and we'll be posting so that you can go back and refer to them in your setup and in your composting setup. So we'll make that available to you all so that you can view that on your own time, just so that we don't keep you here too long. And it looks like there's another question in the chat. Oh, that's not a question, that's a thank you. Anybody else have questions for what we've discussed so far?
Yeah, I just got a quick question. Sorry about that. My echo was on there, but I just have a quick question regarding like if you guys have a YouTube channel. I don't know if I caught that earlier.
Oh, so we actually have just 2 videos posted on our YouTube channel, and that was part of the regenerative agriculture, right, Emma?
Mhm.
Yeah, but we haven't really added much to it. I know we're moving more towards like putting more content out there on Instagram and Facebook, but longer videos that are needed for like YouTube, we're not too engaged.
Yeah, these videos, they're not terribly long. They're about 6-7 minutes, but that's probably where we'll post them, and then also share that out to like the Facebook group that we started so that you can easily find it if you just follow that group.
Cool. Do we have any more questions?
I just have this slide here, just kind of anticipating some of the things that I've seen in people's registration forms. So if you are unable to make it to one of the workshops on Saturdays, I know that that's a day that a lot of us need to get our errands done and what have you. You can just email us at info@centerofsouthwestculture.org and we can send you a link to these recorded workshops. There's still time to sign up. So if you would like to share this with other people, because the workshops are recorded, we can just send those to them and they can catch up using the same link that you used to register. It's still active. We do ask that you complete each of the workshops in order to receive your supplies. And additionally, within that registration form, it's really important for us to have your address and zip code so that we can determine where our drop-off spots need to be for the supplies. I'm thinking that in Albuquerque area, we'll just kind of break it up by the quadrants of the city. But we do have several people in one quadrant as opposed to others. So we'll probably set up a couple in the South Valley area for sure. In terms of the rototiller, needing that, planting seeds, spacing and companion planting are all going to be in our upcoming workshops, as well as the cooking courses that will happen after we complete the gardening piece. And ideally, as long as we know how many folks are finally coming on and we have our good numbers, we'll be able to begin our supply drop-offs and setups of deliveries by the end of this month or early May so that we can get started as soon as possible. And then was there something else that you wanted to say, Emma?
Yeah, I actually, I just wanted to address that last question from Wells really quick because it's a really great one. So he asked what our recommendations for mulch are. Can we use mulch and what kind? So yes, mulch is amazing. It's so good to use for gardens here in New Mexico because it helps to keep the moisture in the soil. It prevents any of that evaporation from occurring, just keeps your plants super healthy, and it also helps to suppress weeds. So it's just a really awesome thing to use that just helps you be more successful. As far as the materials to use go, I will say that straw is kind of a tricky one. And the reason for that, there's 2 reasons. One is that sometimes there are different grass seeds that are kind of hidden in the straw. So by mulching with straw, you kind of end up inadvertently spreading some unwanted grass in your garden that might not be a good thing. The other thing is that straw is often treated with a chemical called glyphosate. And it basically acts as a weed killer. They use it to stop the straw from growing when they're harvesting it. And so what that does is it leaks into your soil and will actually prevent your vegetables from growing. So unless you're using organic straw, I wouldn't use it for mulching your garden. Wood chips, yes, wood chips are awesome. You can also use dry leaves. So if you rake up your leaves in the fall, you could actually save them and then spread them over your garden after you've planted stuff. Basically, any kind of brown material that will kind of create that protective layer on your soil is going to be awesome. So yeah, I would go for it.
Awesome. Do we have any more questions? Okay, if not, you can always, as I said, let us know by emailing us. We really encourage you to follow us on all of our social media platforms, especially Facebook and Instagram, and join that Facebook group where you can also continue to post your questions as you come to them. And then we'll have other tips and little short how-tos and also links to those full-length videos for you all. So our next workshop number 2 is next Saturday, April 17th, 10:30, same time. And the links will be emailed to you just as they were for today's workshop. So I think unless there are other questions or anything else that anybody needs to share now, that will wrap us up for today. And just again, thank you all for joining us. It's really great to see so many people from so many different parts of New Mexico joining in. And this is our contact information if you have more questions. And if you have questions about the workshops or needing a recording or anything, you can contact me at that number at the bottom there and I can help you out. But yeah, thank you all for joining us.